Hello, I'm Dave Moro e Magadi. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is a very special and sacred video. I am acting out of obedience to the Lord. In America, in the world, the times we're living in, there's been a lot of heated and charged arguments and conversations around the topic of abortion. But before I share my stance on abortion, I wanted to share my story in relation to abortion. I was born and raised in an abusive home. To be specific, my father was abusive. And I grew up in Zimbabwe. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, Africa. And I traveled to the US for school. Before I traveled to the US, something life-changing happened. And that is, I was raped before I came to the US. It was during a time that I was so desperate to leave home and be away from home that I didn't share what had happened to me with anyone because I didn't want to jeopardize my chance of leaving home and having some sort of freedom from the abuse and just the painful childhood I had experienced. And so I traveled to the US on a student visa. If you're international, you would know this. It's an F1 student visa. And I came and got settled. It was a huge culture shock. But not only that, because I had traveled such a long distance from home, from everything I knew to everything I didn't know, to a strange place, a strange land with strange people and a strange culture to me. And I was obviously amidst dealing with culture shock. I also had to prepare for the start of the semester by myself. I do not have family here whatsoever, and at the time I came to the US, I did not have family either. Neither did I have friends or anyone that would receive me here. So I came here to basically start life alone in the US. And amidst me trying to settle down and deal with the culture shock, as well as equip myself from the most basic things like getting a phone plan and setting up a bank account and everything else, figuring out transportation, I was joyful because I was away from home. I had escaped the physical abuse. I still experienced the other forms of abuse, but I had at least escaped the physical abuse. And so, although it was quite a bit of a challenge, I honestly didn't look at it that way. And I remember people would always ask me, wow, what made you travel such a far distance to a place where there's nobody you know and no family? Like, they could not understand, at least the community of people I was around at the time could not understand what would propel me to leave my family and everything I knew and cross the ocean to a whole foreign land. I remember my response would always be, when you grow up in pain and you're around pain, escaping the pain of abuse is better than the pain of being in a foreign land or the pain of separation from loved ones. And that's how I felt. So I was actually basking in my newfound freedom, although I would come to realize it was only temporary. So amidst all of that, about a month or so went by. I started classes. I seemed to be settling in well and getting acquainted with the American system, having to adjust to the American education system, the American metric system, because back home I grew up with the British metric system, and just learning the vocabulary differences of a few things. And I had started to fit in a way. That was until one day I felt a really aching pain in my chest, and I could not explain it. I didn't understand or know what it was. I felt a sharp pain in my chest that I hadn't felt before. And I remember I was alone in my dorm room. My roommate had unfortunately had to leave campus because of financial situations at the time. So nothing had been rearranged. By the grace of God and by the providence of God, I became alone in that room, and I wasn't assigned a new roommate. So I was alone, and I felt this pain that actually made me fall to the ground. And I remember reaching for my phone and trying to call somebody I'd become acquainted with who was from the same country but had been at the school a little longer. But they couldn't come to help me quick enough. And I just lay there, and I remember calling my family back home and telling them I'm feeling this unusual pain. I don't understand what it is. Eventually the pain subsided and it went away, and by the time this person came to my room, I was fine, but I had to miss a class. So in order for me to have an excuse for missing the class, I told myself that I would need to go to the health center, the school health center on campus, so that they may see me and document it, and I could be able to take that documentation to class to explain my absence the previous day. So the next day, obviously, I went there. I scheduled an appointment, and I went and I told them what had been going on. And of course, being female, the first thing they ask for is urine sample. And it was a normal day to me. I was just coming here in the hopes of getting a note and moving on with life. And of course, one thing led to another, and I was informed that I was pregnant. That was a shock for me. I did not expect it. Quite honestly, in retrospect, I probably had shoved away the incident that had happened, because outside of that, I had not been having sex, right? So it made no sense to me where the pregnancy could come from at that moment. And so I remember insisting that that cannot be possible, that they had made a mistake, that they should retest or do whatever it is they do with your American pregnancy testing system and figure it out, because there was no way I was pregnant. And so they asked for a second sample, and I remember just going on and saying, yeah, it's just a mistake. It's a big mistake. And I went and I gave it a sample, and the nurse practitioner at that time called me back and repeated the same thing, that I was pregnant. And again, I remember being in the room. In retrospect, I probably was becoming annoying to the staff at that point, probably, because I kept denying that that's not possible. I'm not sexually active, and I was still a virgin. There is no possibility of me being pregnant. So I guess out of the obligation of their profession as healthcare was to empathize or show that they were hearing me. And so the nurse practitioner offered to take a blood sample, that they would test my blood, because they gave me the possibility that, okay, maybe something's not okay with your urine, let's test your blood. So they took a blood sample and told me that I should come back the next day for the results. I remember being on the phone with my loved ones and just pouring out my confusion. And I remember being asked if I had sex with anyone, and I remember saying no. I'm still a virgin. I have not had sex with anyone. And being told that, okay, as long as you haven't had sex with anyone, then this is just some huge mistake, misunderstanding, or there's error in the equipment or something. And I was put to ease with that, and I went back to my class that day and continued with my day and decided to come back the next day. And of course, it was positive. I was told that I'm positive I have the pregnancy hormone in my blood. At that time, I think I started being a little hysterical. The crisis was hitting me, and I remember just telling them that you guys are ruining my life with this news. Like, you have no idea how much you're ruining my life. This is a nightmare. This is not true. Something's not right, because that's not possible, and my whole life is over. My whole life is over. I remember just thinking that my whole life is over. As they kept telling me this, they tried to console me, and again, I'm so thankful for that nurse practitioner, because she was very patient with me. In retrospect, she was very patient as I stood in denial of the fact that I was pregnant. And she offered another solution and said, well, lay down. Let me listen to your belly. Let me see what I can do. And they did there's some exam they do on your belly, and they did that exam, and they confirmed that there's definitely something in there, and that the line that forms between your belly button going down was actually present, and it's an indication of pregnancy. But even as I lay there, just tears streaming down my face, again, as a source of comfort, the nurse practitioner offered that I would be scheduled for an ultrasound to see whatever it is that's in there that's causing this pregnancy result. So I remember walking out of that clinic that day, the health center, feeling extremely defeated. As I mentioned, I grew up in a very abusive home, and my father has always been abusive, and in every sense, and that included financial abuse. And growing up, again, being the oldest, my other sibling and I are the oldest of 11 children. 3 of my siblings passed on at different times, but my parents had a total of 11 children. And being the oldest and in the culture of that home and the religion I grew up in, I carried the weight of being the older child and the pressure. And my father had it such a way that if one child or one person in the family did something wrong, or they are in a situation that affects the family, that everyone else would be punished for it. It was a way of getting, first of all, wedging division, but also always having forced support in the terrible things or decisions that he would make. And so I knew that all these things were running through my mind. What made me be in a crisis at that time was just thinking how I just got to America and now I'm about to go back. All my dreams are having shattered, and not only have my own dreams been shattered, and not only will I be sent on the next plane back, my siblings, especially my sisters, would not get to go to school, because that is the type of man my father was. That my sisters would be told, whatever happened to your sister will most likely happen to you too, and therefore I'm not wasting my money paying for an education for you to end up pregnant and in a situation that is a waste of my money. So I have this crisis going on. So it's not just a decision that should have affected me, but I carried a decision that would affect my siblings and my mother. And there was my crisis. I found myself in a crisis at that moment, and I remember the pregnancy being confirmed and the ultrasound, and for a brief moment as I watched my baby kick in the womb, for a brief moment I forgot my crisis, because I saw life and I could not believe the miracle of life within me. I could not believe that there was life in me. I had seen, some may wonder how I never knew. By the time they found out I was 5 months along, I never exhibited any symptoms of pregnancy except for a belly that was growing. And quite honestly, I just dismissed it as American food. If you're a foreigner or an immigrant, you would know what I'm talking about. American foods, the sizes and the portions are just unbelievable compared to what we grew up with. And I just thought, well, it's a change of diet. I'm eating so much American food, the GMOs, and I'm just gaining weight in my belly. And what makes this story special to me the most is just how much God's hand was on this child's life that I carried. Because before I landed in America, I had missed my period, and through the religion I grew up in, everything was done within that religion to try and bring my period. These things that were being done to me were a good cause for a miscarriage, and yet the Lord's hand was on this baby, and he was protected. Through me trying to lose the weight and doing extremely extraneous exercises, going to the gym every morning, I joined the field hockey team on campus. I was just trying to lose this weight, things that could have strained the pregnancy, considering that that wasn't what I normally did. And yet the Lord's hand was on this baby's life. And so in the ultrasound room, seeing the baby and seeing him move and kick, I remember smiling through the tears. And even though I didn't know what decision I would make, what would happen to me, what my life would look like, what my future is going to look like, in that present moment, I felt an overwhelming amazement and awe at the life that was growing within me, that was in me, that was kicking and moving. And somehow I felt a peace fall on me as I got myself together and left that ultrasound. I remember being on the phone with loved ones and telling them it's confirmed that I'm pregnant. My father didn't know. This entire time he didn't know, and it became clear to my family that he could not know ever, for a very long time, that this would be a secret that nobody else should know. Life was a bit difficult for the next 4 or so months that I carried my baby to term. So although I was faced with many strong recommendations for me to abort the baby, that I had justification, I had a right to terminate the pregnancy because of what had happened and how the baby had been conceived, something in me moved me to protect this child and to not desire to terminate the pregnancy. I just had a fear for life. I could not bring myself to even think about aborting the life I had seen on the ultrasound. I remember even a trusted friend, family friend, who got to know this secret, their first reaction was that I should terminate the pregnancy, because you see, I was an international student. My immigration status was dependent on me not ever conniving on taking advantage of American benefits or trying to stay forcefully in the country, that it was almost a deal as an immigrant. The whole condition of you being granted a student visa lies on the fact that you guarantee and you show proof that you intend to come back to your country, that you have no intentions of overstaying your welcome in America and taking advantage of American citizens' benefits. And so not only did I have the fear of what would happen to my own life, of going back to the thing I had thought I had succeeded in running away from, the atmosphere and the environment of abuse and torture, basically, I also carried the weight of my family, my siblings, suffering consequences for the situation I was in. I faced the fear of my father withdrawing any type of financial support for any dreams I might have. I carried the fear of being in the religion I grew up in, which stipulated that any defiled girl would have to be married, sometimes to the highest bidder, and that usually looked like an old man who was polygamous with 1,000,001 wives. I just was in a crisis. I'm trying to emphasize the fact that I was in a crisis in finding out about my pregnancy. But in addition to all that, I also carried the fear of what would happen to me even if I managed to keep this secret from my father and to say that my very immigration status has been jeopardized based off the misinformation I was receiving at that time. And that the best option was for me to abort. Everything in my life in that season pointed to abortion being the easy way out. I mean, the very shame I carried walking around campus, the people who had started to befriend me no longer anywhere to be found, and the overwhelming sense of loneliness that engulfed me during that season, the shame, the judgmental eyes and gazes I received on campus, given the type of school I was at, I had every good reason to abort this baby. But I thank God that He placed a fear of value for life within me to fight against that. I mean, I would have RAs talk to me about my situation and advise me to abort. I'd have people close to me tell me to abort. I had this close family friend who got to know tell me to abort. I had abortion being screamed in my face, left, right, and center, as the best decision or the best option I had in that season. Nonetheless to say, I carried the baby to full term. It was hard. I was lonely, physically, emotionally, mentally. My loved ones every now and then would check up on me, but for the most part, I felt alone. I fell into a lot of bad thoughts and habits during that period. I remember all I'd ever do is wake up in the morning, bathe if I had the energy or the mental strength, go to class, wobble my way back to the shuttle bus to get to the hotel room that was my dorm, and repeat it the next time. I was either in class, at the cafeteria eating, or in my dorm room. And that's all I ever had. I did have some friends who stayed. A particular friend who was there for me and sometimes would invite me to hang out with them in the room, or the ASA group that I was in. Some people were very kind and gracious enough to invite me, but for the most part, everybody was busy being a college kid, and I didn't fit into that lifestyle. I remember having to get the bus. It was horrible. Transportation system, the public transportation system here for me is just worse than the public transportation system back home. That's how I viewed it. It was excruciating for me to have to go in circles just to get to a particular destination for my prenatal visits, but I pushed through. I went to those prenatal visits, and I thank God for the ministry of Friends of International that existed on that campus. It's a group of Christians who somewhat adopt international students and become kind of family for them, show them around, and sometimes if they need to go anywhere, they'll take them, and just being a reflection of Christ in the lives of international students. And I truly appreciate that. It's because of that ministry that I was able to meet a few people who were kind to me in that season, and sometimes I would get help and lifts to go to my prenatal care. Sometimes people were too busy and I had to walk the path alone, and they showed me pregnancy centers. They introduced to me the ministry of pregnancy center, and I thank God for that ministry and for the ministry of Friends of International, and just for the body of Christ that existed in that time that I wasn't even saved, that the Lord used to carry me through a very tough season in my life that seemed extremely lonely. I've always struggled in the past before coming to Christ, and even coming to Christ, with separation from my family, because although we grew up in an abusive home, it's actually because of that we developed a strong bond among ourselves as siblings, and even as my mom, I think we were our only peace and comfort and consolation to each other, because again, the abuse that went on in our house was a secret to the rest of the world for the most part. And so we were each other's comfort. And through that, I developed almost a sense of identity in my family. And so that was a huge hit, just realizing that I was going through this really big life-changing season without any type of physical support from them, because they were not around, they were not physically here for me. Again, I thank the Lord for His provision. I want to encourage someone who may be watching this video and might find themselves in a crisis. I want to encourage you to know that, first of all, life is given and taken by God Almighty. He is sovereign. He is the creator of all living things. He is creator of the universe, of the world, of the earth. And when He gives life, regardless of the circumstances of the conception of that life, He has chosen that life has purpose. Otherwise, He wouldn't create it. Otherwise, He wouldn't allow conception, even in the right circumstances of marriage, healthy marriage, and a loving family that a child can come into. The Lord has sovereignty to deny conception. Babies are conceived only because God has chosen it and God has allowed it. So there's not even a guarantee, even in a healthy marriage that is faith-based and loves Christ, and they have all the love to give to a child, and God can still decide that conception may not happen or will delay. At the end of the day, all that shows that God is sovereign. So He is the giver of life, and He's also the taker of life. When He gives life, He provides. It's His will. He's allowed it, and He will make provision. Sometimes it doesn't look like the way we expect it to or the way we want to, but He will make a way where there seems to be no way. He will make a way in the wilderness. He will make a way in crisis, He will make a way. And He made a way through the ministry of Friends of International. They threw me a baby shower. I will tell you that when that baby was born, they lacked for nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even a diaper. There's so much that has happened and transpired between that and then. I remember going to pregnancy center and being educated on things I wasn't even aware of. You see, I had helped, as you can imagine, I've helped raise my siblings, being the older one, the older girl especially. And so I had seen a few things, and I knew a few things about babies and taking care of them, but pregnancy centers really equip and educate young women in crisis. Not only do they do that, but they offer emotional support. They offer financial support, provision through diapers and wipes and clothes and toys and things like that. I remember just being given DVDs at that time for me to watch, and even having the ability to watch the birthing process and just feeling a little more prepared. So although I didn't have my family physically with me and I felt lonely in regards to that, God provided people around me. He provided a village. He provided a support group. He provided help. And even when people couldn't help me, whether it was to take me to my prenatal and I had to go on my own, God still sustained me. He gave me the strength. He gave me everything I needed to make it through. I remember being so ashamed of being pregnant that I never took pictures. I think to date I only have a total of 3 pictures of me pregnant, and only one is appropriate to show. And I was so ashamed, but I look back in retrospect and I realized that life is a beautiful gift. And I wish I could reach back to that girl and tell her to walk with her head high, that the Lord was using her body to bring forth a beautiful child into this world for a greater purpose than I and that child. And that the child is so loved, and that I love that child, and that child loves me back, and that everything would be okay. And that those very people who judged me or looked at me differently or looked down upon me are the same people who are inspired by the story that they see now. You know, the ending of the story, rather, though we're not at the end yet, but just to see what God has done, the redemption of the Lord in this life. I walked with shame. I honestly blamed myself for what happened, and that's a whole story for another day. But I carried so much shame, as well as just carrying the weight of everything. But through all of that, I grew such a love for this child within me. I remember I would pray over the child because I knew that I might not get to raise him. I remember being told that my next best option as an immigrant was to birth the baby and give him up for adoption. And that night that I received that call, I have it vivid in my mind. I had been moved closer to campus, so I had a roommate at that time. I was in my 3rd trimester already. I remember waking up from my bed, going into the bathroom, locking myself in the bathroom, and I felt such a pain in my heart. I felt like my heart was being ripped apart. I remember just crying and bawling, like just crying. And although I didn't have salvation, I remembered I just knew to cry to God, and ask Him why. Please no, God, please no. That's how much affection, love, and a bond I had experienced with my baby in the womb. Before they were even born, I became connected, I became bonded, and I loved the child within me. I would talk to him. When I realized that I might not get to keep him, I remember I would pray over him and say, Lord, please protect him, whoever's hands he will lend. Whomever's hands he would land in, that they would love him and care for him as their own. And that God would protect him wherever he ended up. It was a rough time. Sorry. But hold on, there's redemption. There's redemption at the end of the story. There's redemption. And God gets the glory, and God's goodness shines through this story. So I did deliver the baby, albeit a traumatic experience, but I delivered the baby, and I at that point, by the time I delivered him, I knew that I could keep him for now, for the meantime. So I looked forward to holding my baby in my arms. And I remember when he was born, after I had come to and sort of recovered, and they finally brought the baby to me, I remember just looking at him and thinking, wow, I can't believe this whole long thing was in me, was in my small belly, my small frame. And I remember joking around that his head kind of looked like Hey Arnold's head. I don't know why I thought that, but I immediately bonded. I immediately kind of normalized my situation at that time. I felt like I knew my baby because I bonded with him in the womb. And I loved on him, and through all the struggles and what I was able and not able to do with him until the time I had to be parted from him, I savored every moment. Because my father couldn't know, I had to make sure that nothing suspicious ever happened, and that affected what I could have financially. I remember starving one summer, was it Thanksgiving break, and my loved one not being able to send me any money to get food, but God still provided. He made a way. And the cafeteria people were such a blessing. The cafeteria workers were such a blessing, and God taught me humility through that experience. I went to a snobbish school. It's known for being snobbish. And a lot of times there's not much respect given to people in those lowly positions, as we like to put them in this world, as we like to rank everyone. But I can tell you that during that season of loneliness, they were my only social interaction outside of the people in the other ministries. They were like looking out for me. I remember I would go there and they would give me double portion because I was pregnant, and they'll always ask me, how's the baby doing? How are you doing? Are you okay, mama? And I think that the Lord used that. I believe He used those people. They're still image bearers. They're still human beings. They're still God's people that He created, and He can work through anyone. And He worked through that staff to check up on me, and I think mentally it helped me. I almost looked forward to going to eat at the cafeteria every time. It would be my eating choice of preference. And before the baby was born, I remember being called into the office by the administration of the housing department of the school and being told that, hey, we've allowed you to stay on campus while you're pregnant, and you've told us your due date is barely 2-3 weeks away. We just want to make sure you understand that you cannot stay on campus with a baby. Once the baby is born, if your intentions are to keep the baby, you cannot be on campus with a baby. You have to find somewhere to go. I remember looking at the lady across the table and like starting to break down and tell them that, well, I have nowhere to go. I'm international. I'm an international student. I have no family or friends or anybody to take me in with a baby. I knew this because even with the ministry of Friends of International, nobody had room for me and a baby for a permanent solution. So my crisis was heightened literally barely 2 weeks from my due date. And I remember going to the cafeteria straight after that and sitting down, trying to muster the strength to feed myself so my child would stay nourished. And I started breaking down and crying. And then one of the staff members, this older man, such a kind man, and he stopped by. He noticed that I was crying. He was going around bussing the tables, and he stopped at my table because he usually would ask me if I'm okay, and he noticed I was crying. And he asked me if I was okay, and I remember just crying even more hysterically and telling him that I was in a dire situation, and I had been basically told that I had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to move to by the campus. And he comforted me. He was very calm, and he comforted me and said, you don't have to worry, we'll figure something out. And he said, let me contact my church and I'll reach back to you. Give me your phone number so I can be able to reach back to you. And long story short, his church organized housing for me, and a lady that would become the best thing that's ever happened to me in this country took me in. A stranger, she opened her doors to have me indefinitely for however long I needed to be there. And through that church, I saw the first example of what it means to be the body of Christ, to care for the least of these, and that was very inspiring. So God provided a home for me to stay with my newborn baby, and I continued to go to school. So I would come back. Sometimes I would get on the bus with the baby, fresh out of a traumatic C-section. I only gave myself 2 weeks after the delivery to go back and resume classes so that my father wouldn't notice anything or suspect anything, because he had access to my accounts, to bank accounts, to academic accounts, to everything, and he would know before I had any chance to change anything and hide anything. So my loved ones and I had agreed with me that I would do my best to stay on track with school. So my grades stayed, and honestly, it's by the grace of God that I got A's that semester. I don't understand how it even happened through everything. And a lot happened between that time. I did have to be separated from my son for 5 years. But by the grace of God, I was reunited with him. And he is now with me. And a lot of you who know me know him already. And he is an example of the providence of God in my life. He is an example of God's will be done in our lives. He is an example of a miracle in our life. He is an example of what it means
to be loved unconditionally. In my life, he is an example of what it means to be a creation of God's hands, despite the circumstances of his conception. And I share this with full permission from him. Actually, he's the one who insisted. As you can see, that this is very sacred and special. And this video is not an easy video for me to make, for I'm sure obvious reasons any mother out there would understand. It's always a desire for a mother to protect their child, protect their reputation, protect how people may perceive them. But the Lord is faithful, and he has made it very clear that this is a story I ought to share, especially right now. And it's something that my son is very much aware of, because he is who God says he is, not who people call him to be or how people will view him or judge him. And his superpower is in that. He knows his identity in Christ by the grace of God. He is the one who insisted on me sharing his story. He is fully aware of the value of life. We are Christian. We are raising him by the Word of God, with the foundation of the Word of God, which is the only truth that we live by. And he has witnessed me rally for life, because I believe that his life mattered. It matters today. It mattered in the womb. Regardless of how he came to be conceived, his life matters. His life matters just as much as his brother's life mattered, who was quote unquote wanted and planned. They are the same. They are both creations of God. They've both been fearfully and wonderfully made. They were both knit in my womb with purpose and intention. They were both not a mistake to the Lord, regardless of how they were conceived, the circumstances around their conception, whether or not the world deems them real or not, valid or not, or the only excuse that even the pro-life movement uses is that, that's the exception, is that a child conceived out of rape, that should be allowed to be aborted. But who is God? Are we God, or is God God? If we call ourselves Christians, even if you're not Christian and you're watching this video, if you treasure life and you know that it is wrong to murder somebody who is living and alive, then life is life. If the baby was moving and I saw that ultrasound and I saw him moving and I saw him jumping and I saw him sucking his thumb, that is life. I don't know what better definition of life anyone needs. There is movement, there is life, there is breathing, there is separation. He has his own DNA, he has his own organs, he has his own mind. Most importantly, he has his own purpose that God created on purpose with an intention for his glory and not our own. And so I'm thankful to God that he views himself as a completely intentional creation of God, regardless of his circumstances. And he is fully aware of this video. He's fully aware of this testimony. And when he is ready and older, he has things to say. But all I have to say is that his life matters. It mattered then, it matters now. And I can't imagine my life without him. He is a blessed boy. He is very loving and affectionate towards me and his dad, and he is a very, very brilliant, loving, nurturing, and caring big brother. And we are all blessed to have him. He's smart, he's talented, he's the joy of his own class. And he brings smiles to people's faces all the time. Every time he walks into the room, he's just joyful, joyous most of the time, and he's just such a blessing in my life. Motherhood is challenging, but I would not change a thing. I would not eliminate him from my life, and that would have been the biggest mistake of my life, to take his life, because I don't have the authority to do that, but because I have no power to rob this world of the blessing and the purpose that God created him for. And so this is a video that is intended to encourage someone in crisis. I want to encourage you that God sees you, that your life matters. A lot of time in pro-life versus pro-choice argument, we fail to see that there's a love from God that exists for both mother and child. For God so loved me that he sent his only begotten Son to die on the cross for my sins while I was in that crisis. For God so loved my Son that he sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross for his sins. God loves the mother and the child, and that his plan for both of them are good, regardless of what the world says and how the world defines life and how the world defines good. It might not look like a good situation according to the world standards, according to our flesh standards, but it is good according to God's plan and his purpose, which is bigger than me and you and the babies we carry. At the end of the day, we have no right to take away life. And our children do not deserve that. They are a blessing. There's many scriptures that indicate to us that our children are blessings, that they were created and they are knit in the womb by God on purpose. And I wanted to share some with you for your encouragement today. God is the source of life. Genesis 1 verse 26, 27, and 31. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God saw everything that he made, and indeed it was very good. The children we carry from conception are a good creation of God. Job 10 verse 12. You have granted me life and favor, and your care has preserved my spirit. Psalm 127 verse 3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Genesis 25 verse 21. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. These are verses that tell us that life begins at conception. And the woman conceived. So she sent and told David and said, I am with child. That's in 2 Samuel 11 verse 5. Luke 1 verse 36 to 37 reads, Now indeed, Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age, and this is now the 6th month for her who was called barren. For with God nothing will be impossible. I want to dwell on this verse, Luke 1 verse 36 to 37. Life begins in the womb, as we can see here. The word tells us that Elizabeth conceived a son. That word son means human being. It's alive, and yet it was 6 months of gestation in her womb. Life does begin in the womb, and we have no right to take life, and that life is precious, and God has a plan for that life. I just wanted to encourage that to you today. If you find yourself in a crisis, in a situation, I want to share and empathize with you. Another thing, my son sees me serve at a pregnancy center, so I have a heart for the unborn and the mother, and I believe God has called me to serve in that industry, in that ministry, not only as a way to give back to a ministry that helped me in a time of crisis, but also to use my story and to share my story, which I have. This is not the first time I'm sharing it with strangers, but it has been an inspiration. God's glory is seen in the story, that if God has purpose for life, that he's able to redeem. It doesn't matter what crisis or what situation you're in, especially if you're from a very conservative culture like I was, where you're told that you're damaged goods, and if you go through with the pregnancy, that nobody wants a single mother. That is not who God has called us to be. God is a redeemer. He's able to change our story, and I am walking proof of that. I was told by a very trusted, loved person that I would never, now that I chose to keep this child, that I would never be able to be married to a black man, let alone an African man. I was actually harassed into trying to find a white man as soon as possible before the child becomes too old. That would be my only hope for marriage. And I am so glad that the Lord brought me out of believing something so evilly intended like that. What the enemy meant for evil, God used for good. He has changed my life. He has redeemed my life, and I'm a walking testimony. I not only got married to a black man, not that there's anything wrong with any race. We're all one race at the end of the day. We're all one race, the human race. But God saw it fit that I would be married to a black man, not only a black man, but an African man at that, who adores both our sons, loves on them, dotes on them. His sons are his pride and joy. And he is an amazing husband and an amazing father. Do not believe the lie that the enemy tells you, that you will not have a life, you will not have joy, you will not have happiness in Christ. Because his plans, nobody, no eye has seen, no ear has heard what the Lord has in store for us. I never imagined that God would redeem my life to this point. I never knew that he was able to be the source of joy I have today that nobody can ever take away. I may have walked hardships, and there's a lot of healing and trauma associated with that. But God has been faithful and has been good and able. He is able. He is able. He is able. And so I pray that that encourages you. And if you are somebody who values life, who is pro-life, it's one thing for us to sit on computers and phones and post on social media about being pro-life, but I want to challenge you by the grace of God to go out and be the change in the community. Be the reason why mothers choose life over abortion. Provide the help, financially donate to pregnancy centers, to pro-life movements that actually do care. Contrary to the pro-abortion movement, pro-lifers actually care about both the mother and the child. There's a particular ministry I recently started following that it has changed the narrative to pro-love. Because even in the church, people don't realize that there are many women sitting there ashamed because they've committed abortion or considering committing abortion. And the church is the last place they want to go because it's full of shaming people. Let us be of Christ. It is not our place to judge. It is our place to love. And so when somebody is in a crisis, as Christians, we ought to go out there and be like Christ to them. Offer them assistance, provide. We will be the ones God uses to answer this woman's prayers, to save life that is in the womb, if we go out and actually act on what Christ has called us to do. And we are called as Christians to stand up against the evil that is going on, that is abortion. So now you know I am pro-life, I am anti-abortion, regardless of the circumstances. I was a victim of rape, and that doesn't make it an exception. My son is not an exception. His life mattered. His life mattered. There's no exception. Everyone's life is valid, and it does matter. There should never be an exception. Life is life. The Lord has called us to be the voice for those who cannot speak. Whatever you do for the least of these, you have done for me. And I just want to encourage you that the voiceless, innocent lives of the unborn children are the least of these. That if you stand up today to commit to protecting and doing everything you can to help the chain that would potentially eventually lead in the saving of lives, that you would be doing the work of God. That being said, I do have resources I'm going to link down below. Live Action is a great organization that is headstrong pro-life, and they have provided almost any and every resource any mother in crisis could need. But most importantly, find a local pregnancy center. They exist to help you, to walk this journey with you, to provide for the material things as well as emotional support. They will spiritually support you as well. They'll pray for you. That's what we do in the pregnancy center. And I have this privilege, this honor to be used by God in a situation or in a ministry where a woman finds herself in crisis and thinks the world is over. And I look at these women every time they walk in, these girls, these women, and I see myself and I say, I validate their concerns. I validate the crisis they are in. I acknowledge it. I empathize with them, but I encourage them that their story is not done yet. That God is able. He is a redeemer. And that a few years from now, it will be a different story. And choosing life is a great decision, because the blessing of life in one's life is a blessing. So I'm not here to debate about the foster system and, the argument that a lot of pro-abortion people use, that, you want a child to be born into poverty, or you want a child to end up in foster care because they are unwanted. There are options. And that's another thing that is a blessing through pregnancy centers. They educate girls. They educate women on their options. You don't have to parent a child if that's not what you feel called to do. There are many people in the world who would love to love a life. You have option to give up your child for adoption to a loving family that you choose. There are options that don't involve violence against an innocent child. Another very educational resource that pregnancy centers provide is for you to see the reality and the brutality and the rawness of abortion procedures. That's a lot of things that abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood included, at the forefront, they don't always educate. We've had clients come to the pregnancy center and share their experiences before they came to us with Planned Parenthood, and some of them will even say that they were not educated, that after they've seen the educational material, we share videos. There's an abortionist, an ex-abortionist, a medical doctor who performed numerous, I'm talking hundreds of abortions in his lifetime, and the Lord just changed his heart one day, and instead he's now being used by God to educate people on the brutality of abortion. And I think it's important for you to make an educated decision. Find out what it truly means, what the consequences are of an abortion. Make an educated and informed decision instead of walking blindly. And again, the resources I'm going to provide in the description box, as well as your local pregnancy centers, are a great resource for you to go to. Just walk in there and I promise you, you will get the assistance or the guidance or the education that you're looking for, so that when you walk out, the hope is that you are well informed in deciding what you are going to do with the life you carry. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for listening to this video. I know that I've been called to a few things, and there's a lot of things that a lot of people don't agree with. But I just want to caution that this involves my innocent child, and quite frankly, any rude or degrading, hateful, evil comments will be deleted and blocked. This is not the reason for this video. It's not for the privilege of information to slander or do any of that. Please, if you do not have anything constructive to say, do not leave an ugly comment. I'm still a mother, and it is still my duty and my desire to protect my children. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to subscribe. I do have a lot more to share, but for now, this is what I feel led to share. And I hope that this video encourages at least one mother out there to keep her baby, or encourage her to know that the Lord will provide and that everything will be okay in the end. And if at all, I pray that one person out there who has seen children considered out of rape different or as an exception to pro-life, that they would reconsider, because life is precious. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.